have owned these two old Mercedes-Benz now for over 12 years, and during those years I've worked on them on and off. And my dream has always been to have two almost like show quality old Mercedes-Benz that I can cruise around in. And I'm really partial to these. They're both 1953 models. This white one here is a 170D diesel, and that gray-green one behind me is a gasoline six-cylinder 220. I think the reason I'm partial to these suicide door models is that one of my favorite cars has always been a 1934 Ford. I owned a couple of these in high school, and I can remember even to this day the fun that we had with these old doors like this. But you know, I'm getting older, and the business I run has taken more and more of my time, and I'm going to have to say goodbye to these good friends. You know, it's really tough. I mean, I've hesitated to do this for the last couple years, but I'm looking for someone who can get these cars and finish what I started. Neither one of the cars are running. They both need mechanical work, and I will explain that a little bit more later in this video. But both of them are really nice looking cars. You know, it's going to be a lot of work to make them a number one show car. But in terms of just a fun daily driver, they both have super straight bodies, nice paint on them. The 170D has all original interior except for the front seats. It was leather. You can see it has leather door panels. The front seats have been reupholstered, but you can see the original headliner in both of them. And of course, the 220 has all the old original cloth interior that is going to have to be redone. So let's walk around the cars. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in detail, specifically some of the work that will need to be done for the next owner to complete them to make them into a drivable Mercedes-Benz. When I first acquired the 170D, it was running and driving. In fact, I had quite a bit of fun cruising down the road. Boy, I tell you, this thing is a real kick to drive. Don't expect any high-speed performance out of it, though. But it did smoke a lot, and upon further investigation, I found out it did have a cracked cylinder head. So I took the engine apart. We found another head. We rebuilt the head. We put it back on, and we began some of the mechanical restoration. The whole underside of the car has been detailed out and painted, but the fuel system was a little gummed up. And when I got it back together, you know, it was a couple years later when I finally got to finishing the engine, you know, it would not start. And upon further investigation, I found out that the injection pump was pretty much seized up just from sitting, and it got gummed up. So I did acquire another injection pump, but that has not been done yet. The pump is off the engine. The new owner will have to get the other good pump installed and then, you know, get the engine running. The fuel tank is going to have to be hooked up. It's just, you know, hanging under the car for a shipment. So the fuel tank has to come out, and the fuel system has to be done, lines checked, and so on. But then this thing will probably run. There's going to have to be some brake work done. I started to do some brake work on it, but the rear brake pistons are going to have to be rebuilt. So there's some brake work that needs to be done. There's some more engine work needs to be done, but that's about it as far as getting it running and driving. You see, it doesn't need a lot of interior work if you're going to just, you know, not try to make it into a show car. The paint is, as you can see, is very nice on it. There's no dents in the car. It's not a number one paint job. I would say it's probably a strong number two paint job. And then you see those beautiful white wall tires. I paid a small fortune for those tires, by the way, but they are the original type tires, original size. And you can see that those white wall tires just really show this car off. So let's move on over to the 220 now, and I'll show you a little bit more of what's going to need to be done to that car. When I acquired this 1953 220, it was all original. I mean, original down to the paint, the interior. I think it even still had the original tires on it, but it had been sitting in a garage for a number of years. The water pump had gone out, and it wasn't running. The history of the car is really unique because it's very hard to find these 220s that are not rusty, because if they've been in Europe any length of time, that road salt is a real killer on these bodies. But the car was purchased by someone in the military back about 1955, and it was imported very early into its life into the United States. And then this person bought it from the military fella, and then he owned it for 20 plus years before I acquired the car. So I started with a nice rust-free car, and the goal was to make this body perfect. You know, the original stampings on these old cars were not that perfect, by the way. There were a lot of waves in the hoods and the doors, and literally we have spent hours, probably 200-300 hours of body work on this car to block and make every fender and every panel almost perfect. You know, I'm sure there's a flaw somewhere, but the body is absolutely beautiful on this car. There's no welded in patchwork anywhere in the floors or the door panels like you see on a lot of these old 220s. But when I drove it, I remember the very first time I drove it, I says, this thing is amazing. I mean, it has an overhead cam, 6-cylinder engine that had enough power that you could get out on the freeway and really cruise in this thing. And it was a lot of fun to drive. The transmission shifted real well. I had the old column shift transmission. But after I drove it for a couple months, I noticed the engine started smoking more and more and more. And sure enough, I said, okay, that's one of the disadvantages you have with these old cars. When it sits for a long time, you know, the cylinder walls rust and the rings get gummed up. And even though it would start and run and drive, you know, I was starting to lose a little power, and it was just smoking too much. So the engine had to come out and had to be totally disassembled. So, you know, I started acquiring a few parts, and, you know, the engine's basically very strong. You know, good cylinder head, good cylinder walls, good pistons, but it needs rings, bearings, you know, and gaskets. Some of the parts I've purchased, some will have to be purchased. And when I realized that I was going to have to just sell this car, I quickly put the engine back together, just setting the cylinder head on it, maybe one or two bolts in the transmission, and put it in the car, because there's no way you could ship this car to the new owner with, you know, engine here, transmission here, other parts over here. I probably have 6 to 10 boxes of parts that are, you know, all labeled up, but the engine is going to have to come out. It's going to have to be disassembled. You know, you're going to have to get the new bearings and new piston rings installed, and then the engine reassembled, and put this thing back together. I did do some work on the fuel system. You know, there's some fuel system work. I did start rebuilding the brakes, but since it has sat so long since I did some of the brake work, some of that may have to be done as well. And then moving on into the interior, even though it's really cool to have the original interior like this, it is pretty tattered. And, you know, I've tried to find the original fabrics and so on to redo it to original. And I really think that's the way it should be done, because this paint, by the way, this paint color is original to these cars. Very unique, very common, but that is the original color. And finally, take a look at the chrome. I've spent thousands of dollars having most of the parts re-chromed. Look at the beauty of this grille shell. The bumpers, the bumper guards have all been re-chromed. So a lot of the real expensive stuff on this car, I have new glass cut and new front seal. The front and rear glass will have to be installed as well. So there's quite a bit of work that still needs to be done to make this car roadworthy and ready to go cruising. But I'll tell you, most of the expensive work has already been done. So I'm hoping I can find the right owner that will really appreciate this car, because I consider this 220 sedan probably one of the best you'll find in the United States that hasn't been totally restored. You know, it's going to be tough to let these two cars go, and I know that I've just covered a brief overview of both of them. So what I've decided to do is post more specific details, including the price, on my website. So if you're really interested in either car, you can just follow the links below. It'll take you right to a complete full description. I'll even add some pictures that you didn't see, maybe underneath the car and from some different angles, and that will be helpful to you as well. And then I'll list in more detail maybe some of the things that I did not cover in this video. So these are great cars, and I hope they find a great new home.